I didn't plan on it being a cheat. At least, not at first. It started as nothing more than an idea, a way to tilt the odds in my favor without outright lying or crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Work had been draining me for months. I showed up early, stayed late, picked up projects others abandoned, and smiled through deadlines that came with impossible demands. Yet when promotions were whispered about in the break room, my name never came up. I was dependable, yes, but dependable in the way an old office chair is dependable, necessary but not celebrated. It was one night, sitting alone with a lukewarm cup of coffee and staring at a spreadsheet that no one but me would ever appreciate, that the thought arrived. Not like a revelation, not like a thunderclap, but like a sly whisper in the back of my mind. They don't pay for hard work, they pay for value. So make them believe you are more valuable than they can afford to lose. That whisper lingered. It shaped itself into what I began to call, privately, my moral cheat. It wasn't lying, not exactly. It was framing, positioning, setting the stage so that when the curtain rose, I was the only actor who could possibly deliver the lines. The first step was subtle. I stopped broadcasting every task I completed. Before, I had been loud about my productivity, rattling off accomplishments in meetings, filling inboxes with updates. But that only made my effort look routine, expected. Instead, I let silence do the work. I became selective with what I shared, highlighting only the tasks that had direct, visible impact. Small victories became grand showcases, and the countless hours of invisible labor faded into shadows. Next, I started planting seeds. Casual conversations over coffee became opportunities to mention challenges I was facing, not in a way that sounded like complaining, but like I was carrying burdens that required quiet strength. The new client had some tough demands, but I think I've managed to keep them steady, I'd say, letting the sentence hang just long enough for the weight of it to sink in. People began to see me not just as the dependable chair, but as the pillar holding up the room. Then came the most delicate maneuver. I made myself scarce, but in a strategic way. I declined small, meaningless tasks with polite apologies, citing focus on larger projects. I left meetings earlier, made myself slightly harder to reach. And in doing so, I created a sense of absence. When people needed me, they felt the gap. They noticed what it was like when I wasn't readily available. The silence I had cultivated before now worked in reverse. It amplified my presence by highlighting my absence. It didn't take long before whispers of my importance began circling back to me. "I don't know how we'd manage without you," one colleague said. "You've really been holding things together," another remarked. I nodded, humble on the surface, but inside I felt the cheat working, each piece sliding into place. When the annual review cycle came around, I was ready. I walked into the manager's office not with a list of tasks, not with desperate pleas, but with a simple truth framed by months of preparation. I believe my role has grown beyond its current title and compensation. I've taken on responsibilities critical to the company's stability, and I want to discuss how my position can reflect that. The words landed exactly as I had intended. My manager leaned back, thoughtful, weighing the image of me that I had carefully constructed over months. To him, I wasn't just an employee asking for more money. I was the safeguard, the one they couldn't risk losing. The raise came within the week. A generous one, too. Walking home that night, I felt the quiet thrill of victory. I hadn't lied, not once. Everything I had said was true. Every burden I had hinted at was real. Every project I had carried mattered. But the way I told the story, the way I let silence, absence, and framing do the heavy lifting, that was the cheat. Some might call it manipulation. Maybe it was. But in the end, it was also survival, a strategy in a game where the rules had never been written for people who simply worked hard and hoped to be noticed. I called it my moral cheat because it lived in that gray space between honesty and strategy, between ethics and ambition. And as I watched my paycheck grow and my title shift upward, I realized something else. Sometimes the smartest move isn't to play fair. It's to play well. The first weeks after the raise felt surreal. The extra money in my account was proof that the system could bend if you learned where to press. I treated myself quietly, no flashy purchases, no sudden lifestyle changes. Just little things. A better brand of coffee in the mornings, a new pair of shoes that didn't squeak on the office floor, dinners that didn't come from the cheapest end of the menu. Each small upgrade reminded me that I had found a way to be seen, that my voice carried weight now. But with recognition came something else I hadn't expected: scrutiny. Suddenly, people were watching me more closely. My manager checked in on my progress, not because he doubted me, but because he now saw me as essential. My colleagues, too, seemed to notice the shift. Some smiled with congratulatory sincerity, while others gave me that careful look, the kind that hides curiosity behind politeness. They wondered how I had done it, what I had said, and why it had worked. I played my part carefully. I kept my tone humble, my words measured. I thanked people for their support and carried myself as though the promotion was not a victory, but a natural next step. Inside, though, I couldn't shake the sense that I was performing, that every interaction was now part of a role I had written for myself. The moral cheat wasn't just a strategy one had used, it was a script I now had to keep acting out. To maintain the image, I had to stay slightly distant, slightly untouchable, just valuable enough that the thought of my absence created unease. I couldn't go back to being the dependable chair, because that version of me had been overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. There were moments of doubt, late at night, when the quiet pressed in on me. I'd ask myself, was it really a cheat, or was it just clarity? Had I tricked them, or had I finally shown them the truth they had been blind to? The line blurred every time I thought about it. And yet, as weeks turned into months, I noticed something unsettling. My colleagues began to mimic me. They, too, grew quieter about their workloads, more selective in what they showcased. Some even withdrew from the smaller tasks, leaving them undone or pushed to the bottom of the pile. I had created not just an image, but a ripple. One afternoon, I overheard a newer employee whisper to another, "That's how you get ahead here. Don't kill yourself doing everything, just make sure the right people notice the right things." The words were like a mirror held up to my face. I had turned my private cheat into an unspoken rule that others were beginning to follow. Part of me felt proud. Another part felt cornered. Because now, the stakes had changed. If everyone started playing the same game, then my advantage would vanish. My silence would no longer be special, my absence no longer alarming. The stage I had set for myself would soon be crowded with actors performing the same role, all fighting for the spotlight. The realization came with a cold clarity. The cheat worked because it was rare, because I had been the only one playing it. If it became common, I would need a new strategy, a new edge. And so, almost without realizing it, I began planning again. Not because I wanted more money right away, not because I craved another title, but because I understood something deeper now. Work wasn't about hard effort or loyalty or being good enough. It was a theater, and in a theater, survival meant learning how to control the story being told about you. The first cheat had been moral, harmless enough that I could still sleep at night. The next one, I knew, would demand more. And that thought, sitting heavy in my chest, both thrilled and terrified me. In the months after my raise, I began to notice the small ways my world had shifted. Meetings felt different. People paused when I spoke, as though my words carried more weight than before. When I walked into a room, conversations quieted just a little, not out of respect, but out of calculation. Everyone was measuring me, trying to read how much influence I truly had. That influence was intoxicating, but also dangerous. I had built it on perception, not on an official mandate. My raise had not given me authority, only visibility. And visibility, I learned, was as fragile as glass. The pressure built slowly. My manager leaned on me more, sending me into client meetings where the stakes were higher. My team turned to me when projects threatened to collapse. I had positioned myself as irreplaceable, and now I had to prove it every single day. I couldn't afford to have an off week, couldn't let myself slip back into the shadows. The strange thing was, I started to miss the shadows. I missed being invisible, the freedom of doing good work without anyone noticing, the quiet satisfaction of competence without the glare of expectation. But there was no going back. Once you step into the spotlight, the dark feels like failure. That was when I realized the cheat had changed me. I wasn't just using a trick to get ahead anymore. I had rewritten my identity inside the company. And every day, I had to protect that identity, polish it, defend it. So, I invented new cheats. They were small, almost invisible. When projects went well, I made sure to highlight my role in keeping things on track, even if my contributions were quieter than others. When things went poorly, I carefully framed my involvement as problem-solving, never mistake-making. If someone asked me for help, I delayed just long enough that they solved it themselves, and then I stepped in afterward to review their work. It was still honest work, still participation, but angled in such a way that I looked indispensable. At first, these cheats felt clever, but soon they began to gnaw at me. Late at night, I would lie awake wondering if I had become a fraud. Was I truly valuable, or had I only learned how to make myself look valuable? The raise in my paycheck reminded me that the system rewarded perception, not sweat. But my conscience whispered questions I didn't want to answer. The tension reached a quiet climax one Friday evening. I was packing up my things when a colleague, someone younger, sharp-eyed, eager in the way I had once been, caught me at my desk. "How'd you do it?" he asked. "Do what?" I replied, feigning innocence. "Get noticed. Get the raise. Everyone says you barely even try anymore, but you're the one they're scared to lose." The words hit me harder than I expected. Barely even try. I wanted to protest, to explain the strategy, the silence, the absence, the cheat. But I couldn't, because, in his eyes, the story was already written. I gave him a vague smile and said something forgettable, but inside, I was unraveling. It was then I understood the true cost of my moral cheat. I had won the raise, yes. I had carved out a reputation, yes. But I had also planted a seed of doubt in others and in myself. They thought I had gamed the system. And maybe I had. But here's the truth no one tells you. Once you cheat, even a little, you can't go back to playing the game straight. Because you'll always wonder, without the trick, without the performance, without the silence, would you have been enough? That question lingered, heavier than the raise, heavier than the praise. And I knew, deep down, I'd spend the rest of my career trying to answer it.